what we'll do is go ahead and call the meeting to order then and get things going. Could you help us with a roll call vote? And just a reminder that everyone should say where they are, municipality of their current location.
That's right. All right, Stephen.
Whoa.
Present at the Southeast Area Park in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
All right. Jennifer. Alan.
Yes, I am here from Damray, France in Burgundy at 1 a.m.
All right. Sarah.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Okay. Jeffrey.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Camilla. Alice. Frank.
Present from Eastport, Michigan.
Adam.
Here in Glen Arbor, Michigan.
Mr. Dahoney. Erica Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Lisa Dish. All right, and that is roll call.
Wait a minute, I'm here. I'd like to say that I'm here.
Oh,
Ann
I'm so
Arbor.
sorry. I am so
Okay.
sorry. I skipped over you. I apologize. Rita Mitchell is here.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, in that case, we will go on to approval of the agenda. I know, Alan, you did send some emails earlier today about agenda items to be added. I wanted to learn a little bit more about where you wanted to go with this and then see what folks want to do.
Yes, well, I wanted that in the report of working groups, there be a report on the working group on the move from the request for information to the request for proposals. And I was hoping that there would be a report from the staff on the progress and possibly a draft of the current state of the actual request for proposals as it is being developed.
Alan, I can provide an update on the RFP in one of the working group updates.
Okay.
And I hope, will that be sufficient?
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other items in that case then that folks would like to add to the agenda that Heather put on the Legistar?
Is there going to be any report on the status of the request for proposals?
I'm going to provide one. I think it's covered under the, it's not actually.
Maybe that's
So-
recommendations.
It is under working groups. The agenda was revised.
Okay. Update, yeah. The one on the internet, by the way, I don't think has that on that. So that's the one I have pulled up right now.
Okay, I will double check that. It should be on there.
Okay. All right, perfect. Well, we'll go ahead. Ellen, you will get an update for sure. I was planning on doing that. In that case, then, unless there are any other items to be added, could we have an approval of the agenda as it is provided? Frank?
Just a point of clarification. I think Heather asked Rita earlier this afternoon whether we wanted a link on the agenda to the worksheet on the comparable communities working group. And I don't know if I kind of responded for the both of us, Rita, saying that we did want that. And I don't know if that got to you, Heather, or not.
It did. Yeah, it did get to me just now, just before this meeting. So it should be up there now.
Okay.
Sometimes it takes a little bit to upload again, but that is on there. So if you go back to the agenda,
Okay.
it should be on there. And the RFP is also on there under working group updates.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Any other questions then, or could we have an motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
All right,
Second.
moved by Frank, seconded by Erica. All in favor of approving the agenda as online, say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes. If we could have folks make sure that they take a look at the minutes from the last meeting. Those are also posted on the agenda. Any questions around those minutes?
Yeah, well, I thought that what we had decided was that we were going to communicate to the city council about opening parking. And I see that I perhaps misunderstood that. But I guess I in terms of also report, did you have a conversation with Jeff Watson? And how did that turn out? Or maybe there can be an added report on that if there was such a conversation. And because I've had correspondence which I shared perhaps inappropriately, but that's an ongoing question.
To answer your question, I have not had a conversation with Jeff Watson. He did return an email to me today, and we're trying to get together, and then not next week, the week after, or the week after that. So that is the update I've got from Jeff.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
If you don't mind me pausing, there's a person on the phone with their hand up. I'm just going to make sure that it's not one of our commission members.
Sure.
All right, I'm allowing the person with the number ending in 326 to talk. Is this one of our commission members? I just want to make sure.
No, this is Jeff Crockett. I'm waiting for citizen comment.
Okay, all right, we'll get to that shortly then.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, any other questions on the minutes then? All right, in that case, can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Second.
Moved by Alan, seconded by Erica. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. In that case, we are on to public comment. Heather, is there anybody besides Jeff?
There is no one else aside from Jeff. Jeff, you can go ahead and speak.
Hello, am I okay to speak?
You are.
Yes. Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm Jeff Crockett, head of the green team, and I have some very, very good news. We have expanded the number of gardens we are managing this year from 2 to 4. Thanks to Rita Mitchell, we have a new community partner, the Ann Arbor Wild Ones, with over 90 members who support the expanded use of native plants and plants that attract pollinators. Last year, I gave guided tours to Erica Briggs, Lisa Dish, and Adam Zemke, and this year I would like to extend a tour invitation to all members of the Council of the Commons. At this time, I would like to recognize individuals and groups that have donated plants. Bonnie Pierce, Odile and Alan Haber, Kathy Griswold, Argus Farm Stop on Liberty, Margolis Nursery, Rita Mitchell, Sherry Thompson, the Tung Koo Foundation, Elizabeth Smith, Mark Lee, Abbott Nursery, English Gardens, Feral Flora, Side Oats Farms, Susan Beecher, Loris Damerow, Janet Osborne, Ginny Weingate, Brooks Curtis, Deb Urey, Kathy Susan, Dorothy Hastings, Sarah Haynes, Kara Gagliardi, and Nancy Whitelaw. I would also like to recognize Robert Greasy, former director of the Mathi Botanical Gardens, who created the design for Area C2 and is advising us on signage. Thanks go to Erica Briggs and Lisa Dish, who contacted DDA Director Jeff Watson, which resulted in the installation of a water spigot that has significantly made watering faster and more efficient, and also encouraged the DDA to weed their garden plots, which for the most part have been unattended. A side comment to Eric and Lisa, I was at the Commons at SAM and saw a DDA contractor pulling weeds. I believe your input has made a difference. Hooray! I would also like to recognize 3 new volunteers. The first is Beth Smith, who in spite of a recent knee replacement, designed garden plots mostly with different types of native grasses, reached out to donors, secured plants, and then helped with the installation. The second is Brooks Curtis, a retired Ford engineer who is a volunteer at several city parks, and has been very helpful with planting and maintenance this year. The third is Richard Corson, a former administrator in the U.S. Department of Commerce, a former director of the U.S. Export Assistance Center, and much, much more. His expertise is in project planning and consensus building. He retired in 2019, and since that time has been providing assistance to nonprofits across the country. He now would like to find out if there is a role for him to help with the activation of the commons. Thank you, Richard. I have greatly enjoyed our conversation. As for the future, we believe that our gardens are jump-starting the short-term activation of the commons, which we hope will include sheltered seating near the garden areas, a drinking fountain, and Wi-Fi. That activation could include community partners taking over all the garden areas surrounding the library lot, similar to what has been done in Plymouth Kellogg Park. In exchange, the community partners could install signage to promote their organizations, a win-win. Finally, let's start small and remove parking from the northwest corner of the library lot and assess the results. That assessment should help us in planning an expanded activation. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate the update and glad to hear about all the good progress you've made with the Green Team. Any other public comment?
There is not, but Alice is joining us.
Excellent. We'll wait till Alice hops on here and then keep going with our agenda. Hi, Alice.
Hello. I am finally, I was in Ann Arbor, but I was at the observatory at another public meeting. That is the Detroit Observatory.
Quite all right.
At this,
we started, but we've just got through public comment on the agenda. So
I heard something that sounded good about the Green Team. And so
yeah, Jeff Crockett just provided an update about the additional plantings and partnership with Wild Ones, and then also an update around the spigot that Erica and Lisa helped work with the DDA on to aid in watering. So all good news.
Good.
In that case, since there is no more public comment, we'll close that, go into member news and updates, and see if there are any updates that are not specific to the working group updates. So if there are folks who would like to comment or add anything that we would not cover in the working groups, please feel free to raise your hand. Alice?
Yeah, can't find the raise your hand button. I got an email from Parks about all kinds of updates from them, as I might usually get, and I happened to scroll all the way down to a thing that said, consider Liberty Plaza as a venue for public events, or I guess even private events. I don't know. It's a little unclear why this was all of a sudden a statement to facilitate or make the permitting of event rentals easier, the quote entire site. So I just wanted to mention that because there's obviously a few parallel tracks going on, and it'd be nice to kind of help them reinforce each other. So that was one thing I had on my mind. And I think I'll leave it for someone else to add something else.
Erica, you got your hand up. Feel free.
Yeah. So I just wanted to provide an update on that, or answer that question. So Administrator Dehoney has kind of made it a priority to focus in on Liberty Plaza this year. That came out of, I think, prior to a number of different conversations, partly out of this group in terms of need for short-term activation and thinking about where on the block most desperately needed that attention, partly from, demands around concerns from neighboring businesses around activity there that's been dangerous. And so that has been something that I've been reporting on in terms of ongoing stakeholder groups, as has Adam. And so the city is working to make it easy, promoting Liberty Plaza for events. Another update on that is that there's, I don't know if they've closed yet or not, but the city has posted positions for temporary positions for folks who would actually be staffed to do programming there. So this is a big change for the city. The Parks Department has for a long time noted, kind of as we found in our research on public spaces, that they often require dedicated staffing to help with program activation. And so the city, that's council had allocated in the last budget $100,000 specifically for Liberty Plaza, and a bunch of, a lot of that money is being used to fund these positions that will work on programming, hopefully through the end of the year, perhaps a little longer. We'll see how far those dollars can stretch.
And what Erica said is right in line with the latest information that I had from Mr. Mahoney as well regarding the plan. So I think the goal of this, at least as I understood it last, was to try and provide some additional catalyst around Liberty Plaza, and then to really have discussion, not being simply specific to Liberty Plaza, but have the initial work being done around Liberty Plaza and have it, use it as sort of a case study around what we can do. So I thought it was a very positive conversation that came out of that, and it's good to hear that the positions have been posted. Rita, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I guess my question just more detail.
Rita, I
can you hear
think
me
you're muted.
I
Can you hear me now?
Rita, but I couldn't hear any of Adam's statement.
Is it just Alice who were okay?
Yeah, you were fine for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Should I continue? It's a really simple question. I want to know the definition of through the end of the year, Erica.
Yeah, I think it's a little unknown right now how long. I mean, when those positions, when people get into place, the thought had been that there would be enough funding for 3 positions through summer and fall. When the stakeholder group got together, there was certainly a encouragement to try to at least fund through the end of the calendar year, through the holidays, and I don't anticipate we would, there was a sense that in January, February, March timeframe that's unlikely to, need much programming during the cold winter months. Certainly I indicated in those times that's oftentimes when you're doing event planning, those are the months that you are planning really for the next season. So, we obviously could use folks doing this year round, but this is sort of a pilot project. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And will there be a plan to have some kind of an assessment of it? So I know it's kind of like a cold startup, but it seems like that's something that we need to have in order to support where we're going.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that at least that's something that we call forth, that it needs to be evaluated, but obviously it also just needs to be successful.
Sure. And another question I have is, what's the relationship between this activity and us here at the Council of the Commons?
Well, I think it relates in the sense that this is part of our charge, in the areas within is part of the property that we're talking about, but the funding does not extend to the entire center of the city, the entire block, all the public spaces on the block. This city's administrator is really focusing, and the city staff is really focusing in on Liberty Plaza this year.
So I guess let me ask it a different way. Is the Council of the Commons responsible in any way for this particular project?
I mean, I guess indirectly so. I think that some of these discussions came out of this, but really we haven't been leading it. So I would really credit, Administrator Mahoney for taking the lead on this, not so much us, right? But I do think that we had the conversations, and I think he was part of those conversations as well. So I think indirectly there's been a part to play for Council of Commons, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would second that too. I think that Mr. Mahoney is, I think he is trying to navigate a difficult situation in Liberty Plaza, and also utilize it as a way to informed based on our previous discussions. Utilize it as a way to move forward on some of these things, and had the opportunity to influence the city's budget and put in a placeholder with some ARPA funds. And so, I thought that his effort was with good intention, and is one that is meant to be constructive at initially focused on Liberty Plaza, but utilize, just as we informed that effort, utilizing it to inform efforts that are larger than that. So.
Right. Okay. I guess in the end, my wish is for this to have a what would feel to me like greater communication than we've had, so we understand what's going on and what implications are and what we might use as roadmaps for the future of the whole site.
I think that's a fair request. We can make sure, Heather, if you can make a note to maybe on our next meeting agenda to make sure we have a discussion specifically about the city's progress around Liberty Plaza. Is that okay with you, Rita?
Thank you. Yes.
Any other member news and updates? Okay. Alan?
Yes, well, I want to report in my travel. Odile and I were in Istanbul, which is an amazing city full of little parks and commons and public areas, with music, with people bringing food, with volunteer art being sculpture being contributed. It was an amazing place, and as a cat lover, also the most friendly place for cats I've ever been in. And we were on a ferry boat. Istanbul connects both Europe and Asia across the Bosporus. And in the ferry boat, there was very crowded, and there was in the waiting area 12 seats along the wall, and 11 of them were occupied by people, and one was occupied by a sleeping cat. And no one disturbed the cat except for an occasional pet or two. Cats actually had citizenship, and so it was lovely to see. But it was a very, very sociable place. Like I wish Ann Arbor was more so. The people were all over, and the park areas were very populated and amazingly diverse. So it was a place for aspiration, though amazingly a big city, big, yeah, 5 times bigger than New York City.
Jeez.
Population of 15.5 million, I just looked up. So.
That is pretty big. It's 1.5 times the state of Michigan.
Oh, jeez. Oh.
That's very cool. Any other member news and updates? All right. In that case, we'll go on to the next agenda item, which I think is developing recommendations. And I know we started talking about this at the last meeting. I have to admit, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage with some of the last meeting, given my inability to really participate very well. So I'd like to open it up to see where folks wanted to go on this line item. know we had talked about originally moving what we had to recommend to city council. And I know we had talked about moving some other items around to city council around short-term activation. I don't think we've taken action on those items yet, but I wanted to make sure that we were capturing where folks are at right now around any recommendations to council. Alice?
I don't really know how to approach this. I keep running into little tidbits of articles in local news that make me that sort of stimulate or inspire my thinking about the relationship of the city of the center center of the city to the rest of the block into the rest of the city. Such as the effort to facilitate programming through parks for Liberty Plaza, which is a park, and it is, contiguous to all what we're doing for the city of the center of the city. So it's beginning to be a little hard to imagine why we have such a segregation of the issues around, say, Liberty Plaza, or the adjacency of the transit system, or the library's problems with accommodating all kinds of segments of the public, and Liberty Plaza and the surface of the parking structure. So I think we still could solve a lot. I think two things come to mind that would cover some of this, not just that permitting process, but other things like the scheduling of events for not necessarily in Liberty Plaza, but like Main Street events and the adjacency of Main Street, and just how segregated do we have to be about things, including like our so-called partner in the DDA owning the structure, but using the contract with the parking or the contract with the contractors who built the structure, using it as a reference to dissuade us from moving forwards with some of the recommendations we would make, like primarily getting the parking off the route. We've never been provided with the specific clauses or the specific restrictions about weight-bearing loads, or about revenues, or about recently I was made aware of issues with I don't know, maybe Jeff Crockett mentioned something about the issues with Republic Parking's workforce and the relationship of volunteers gardening on the Republic doesn't, something that the new DDA director was saying, that there's with the treatment of the union workers versus the volunteers, which seemed really odd because we use volunteers all the time in city projects. So I don't even know where to start now, because it seems like everywhere we turn with a recommendation, there's a reason that someone brings up without clear reference to the reasons why we can't even recommend to the council. If we recommended to the council, could we not get the council's evaluation of that recommendation at least, and then go from there? I mean, how do we go forward? If we can't recommend like we're supposed to recommend, how do we go forward?
Rita, you just unmuted yourself. Would you like to add anything?
I agree with what Alice has said. It feels like we're in a continuous spiral and not coming to a point of action that is confusing. And so where do we go?
Can we get, for instance, the parking off the, what are the barriers? They haven't been specifically if we could have specifics of the barriers and we could address them specifically, I think we'd make some progress, but we just don't get any of that feedback. That is, it goes with food trucks too, or gardening, or, you know, everything that we want to recommend, including designation as a park, which I think would make the whole enterprise a little more integrated. Because of things that we do for Liberty Plaza, or might as well be done for this center of the city, and for the library's problems, and for, you know, all of this. So I don't get it.
Erica, you've got your hand up. Did you want to speak to any of that?
Yeah, I was trying to make some notes, try to address some of those pieces. So I heard a few things in that. One specific information, I think early on in the commission, we had some questions, and Heather arranged for some different presentations. I think if there are different questions that we believe that we still have, that might be useful to identify specifically what those questions are, and that some of those questions we might be able to get some staff feedback. I heard. So I think that's one piece. I think we have gotten some feedback on what some of the challenges are. And for example, if picnic tables, if the parking is removed and picnic tables are going to be put there, who is going to maintain them? What is the operational model for that? And so that is one of the questions that staff has identified as a question. And I think that council would continue to would have those questions as well. I think that's one of the things that we could either as a commission make some recommendations around, and then either that gets moved on to council. Certainly one of the, so that's one piece. I think we really need a nonprofit that's willing to step forward and do that work, as we've seen in some of these other public spaces that we've talked about. When with regards to, certainly the commission could make a recommendation around removal of parking. One of the questions that I would have as a council member taking this to council is, we know that all of our work from comparable communities has shown that successful public spaces have programming. And so I would be a little reluctant to, suggest the removal to kind of just an open parking lot if we didn't have a programming model. So I think there are some sticky questions that we're in the midst of, and we can either figure out how to answer them, or we can just make recommendations forward and ask, council can determine whether or not as a body we would want to recommend staff work on them. Designation as a park is certainly something we've never talked about as a commission. That might be something that we want to work through, what the implications are of that. We certainly have not ever received communications or discussions with that. So that's one topic that we haven't actually discussed as a commission explicitly. Those are some initial thoughts that I have.
I think this is some good questions. Rita, you've got your hand up. Feel free.
Okay, thanks. Well, I would like to suggest that we make a recommendation that we assess the potential of designating the top of the parking structure area and Library Lane as a park, management as a park. We could look at costs, we could look at staffing, we could look at whatever all those issues are from a cost benefits perspective. Because if we're going to have programming there, one of the areas that does in the city that is set up to manage some programming is parks. They have staff that have done that for many types of things for a long time. And so that seems to me one potential option that could be considered. So I'm just offering it. Let's talk about it. We haven't gotten anything else. So I'm just going to go for it.
So Alan, and then I'd like to add something to that. Alan, please feel free. You're muted, Alan.
Sorry. So my view is that the operative word in this proposal in the city charter is this is a commons. And that has a particular meaning that the users have a role in the management. It is not delegated to a governmental or a private authority, but is essentially self-managed. And that has been demonstrated all over the world as a most effective way and productive way of managing commonly pooled resources. And that includes both the sense of the central park and also a civic center with four-season functions. So I want that we keep in our mind that there is the potential to be explored and hopefully in the request for proposals elaborated of a civic center building with multiple functions that parallel what goes on in the park, and that the management of this is not delegated, as Rita suggested, to the park department, which over the time of this whole campaign has indicated no particular interest in the management of this kind of programming, but that we see some form of conservancy, land trust. The Library Green Conservancy has discussed at some point whether it wants to be the kind of 501c3 manager and basically has declined for the moment that role, but some kind of land trust that involves the users to be self-managing and allowing other properties to be aggregated. In particular, I think it is desirable to view the Noble House as a potential aggregation into the commons, and particularly the ground floor of which could serve as a social center benefiting for the users of Liberty Plaza. But I think that we need to look at a model around a conservancy or a land trust that allows the users to, and the diversity of users, to have a role in the management of the aggregated space, both of the park and of a future civic center building and its functions therein, and possibly other properties as well. So I want to add that, and maybe we need clearly more discussion of that. And the sense of a commons is something that has not been adequately explored among ourselves. And I think one recommendation to the city would be to encourage the city itself to look at that literature and to encourage the library and the public school system to advance the education on what is the commons, which is a form of organization all over the world, but not so common in America. As some people in the founding fathers said, the purpose of our Constitution is to privatize the commons. And this is an effort to publicize the commons. So I add those thoughts into our conversation.
Thanks, Alan. Frank, you got your hand up, and then I'd like to add a suggestion from hearing, at least what I've heard thus far, but could change after you talk.
I think this is a very important element, the future management and organization of these spaces, and I would include Liberty Plaza. I wonder if this shouldn't be a major component of requests for proposals, that that this element be looked at and integrated into all the planning and design and development of the site is this management piece. It's clearly critical that in our comparable studies working group, the communities that have been successful, Plymouth, Royal Oak, and Detroit, especially Plymouth, Royal Oak is so new, but Plymouth and Detroit, they have very different approaches, but successful. And so this really needs to be, I think, addressed with the RFP. And maybe that's kind of a formal mechanism to see that we will make, tangible progress along this and many other lines.
Frank, I'm glad you said that, because that is a good segue into one of the aspects I was going to say. So I noted several of the questions that Erica referenced, and as well as Alan. And I do feel like there is a, given the importance of, in particular, what I would characterize as shorter term goals that we want to achieve with the space, and several questions regarding how those goals are achieved. And when I say goals, I mean the ability for us to make recommendations to council, to do things, to take action. And so I feel like one of the things that we can do that would be productive in our wheelhouse is to try and to do two things. One, we do have an upcoming presentation to the Parks Advisory Committee. We ended up pushing that from June. We were originally going to go in June, ended up because of some scheduling issues, pushing that to July. But we are planning on doing that. I think it's the 20th of July or something like that. Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong, but 18th maybe. But I'd like to see if there's a way that we could both between now and then, within our own working group structure, form some shorter term ways of developing those recommendations around the shorter term things, the ease of permitting process and assistance for special event planning, the removal of vehicles removal of parking from the lot on a more regular basis in concert with increased programming, and then how that could be done based on the same line of thought as to what is happening with Liberty Plaza around the activation of Liberty Plaza for special events. So I feel like some of those things can be done by us, with working with Heather and other members of city staff, but also, and I'm hopeful that this discussion with the Parks Advisory Committee is productive and good. And based on conversations that Erica and Stephen and I have had, I expect that that'll be the case. And then we can work together more. And that's part of my goal there. And so I feel like there's sort of two time periods that we're talking about here. We're talking about what I heard that I perceive to be a lot of shorter term things, meaning pre-development, pre-planning. And then there are certainly things that, as Frank referenced, that are more part of the formal planning process, input gathering process, that would be handled as part of a paid for RFP or a paid for plan that comes out of an RFP. And so I'd like to suggest that maybe we, on the longer term, in particular, the designation as a park, because I think that has some very significant implications for our ability to influence this process. I'd like to see if we can table that part. We could certainly investigate it, but I would hate to make a recommendation that's premature of a planning process around the designation of something. But on the other items, I think it is very much in our wheelhouse to start those actions. And then also, hopefully, we can have some joint efforts with parks and PAC and park staff following that discussion. And so later this month. So I'd like to make that suggestion. I know Alice has her hand up, so we can get to Alice first and then maybe have some discussion. Alice, feel free. You're muted.
It's getting up, seems to be getting foggier and foggier. And I think when Rita suggested designation as a park, that's one way of starting the conversation with PAC. But we do have special properties that the parks have that they don't call parks. And I think this fits very closely with the idea of a special property, which is still under some degree of park management, yet also some degree of public management in general, such as with private foundations and organizations of government, such as it's different with Farmers Market and Cobblestone Farm and Kemp House and all of these, quote, special properties. And I see no limitation on that kind of designation for the center of the city because it doesn't require, it just builds on what we already have available. And I don't know whether, I think we would have to create a specific structure of management, even as a special property. So I think there's some things we can do concretely, which we know will have to be done no matter what, like removal of cars from the top of the parking structure. And that is a different discussion with different people. And so in order to make these discussions more productive, I think we have to start really inviting and including and listening to the larger public institutional partners on the block, such as the library, the DDA, and parks included, and whether we consider representation of those entities on our commission, so we have direct communication at least once a month. Because I still don't know what you mean by a presentation by parks and who's doing that presentation or to parks. It's not clear to me what's happening there. Shouldn't we know a little bit about that and be able to attend at least?
Yeah. So and I was planning on giving this update during the later in the agenda. But I can give it now. The plan is, Stephen is our liaison to PAC, and Erica is, I think you are a sitting member of PAC. Am I correct am I off on that?
Yeah. Yes, I am a council liaison.
Council liaison.
Yeah, and just so you know, here I'm a voting member. On PAC, I am not a voting member. It depends on which commission you're on, if council members have voting rights or not.
And so Erica, Stephen, and I discussed back in May what a presentation could look like, and agreed that I would provide the presentation to PAC, and I would be the primary speaker. And then Stephen, member of PAC, and would be there as our liaison to the council, the liaison from PAC to the Council of the Commons. And Erica is a member from City Council. And it is a public meeting. I believe it's Zoom based. And we were originally planning on doing it in June on the 20th. The meeting ended up getting moved, I believe. And then we ended up having some scheduling issues. So we agreed that we were going to move it to the July meeting, and Stephen confirmed that. And so we are on the agenda for the July, I think it's July 18th, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think it's like Tuesday, July 19th. Yeah.
There you go, 19th, exactly. And so, that the meeting certainly is, you're able to attend if you'd like, Alice, for sure. It's not an in-person meeting, so it's it's probably going to be a little less personal, but you're more than welcome to attend.
Well, it would probably be as a member of the public. It sounds like that the three of you would be participating in the meeting, and any of the rest of us would be these names in black squares, or not even in like the members of the public who attend our meetings here. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't even think I'd be participating outside of just making a presentation. I think I would just be there, presenting on one topic on their agenda when it comes up. And, Stephen is a member of PAC, and so is Erica. And so they would obviously be participating in the entire meeting.
What time is this on July 19?
I think you're muted, Stephen.
It's at 4.
4 o'clock.
Yeah, this isn't a joint. Yeah, the idea was not to have a joint meeting between the commissions, just to do a presentation. And
yeah.
I think a joint meeting is a little unwieldy. So it makes sense. I just want to be clear about what we're going to get and what we're not going to get. So I still think that.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm happy to share the presentation I'm working on, for that meeting with everyone here. And, with the goal, at least personal goal out of this is not to necessarily just provide an update to PAC. It's more to really try and build a stronger working relationship. As I understand it, there's been a lot of new members of PAC, and certainly we've had shifting within city staff, and a strong desire for us to have a joint working relationship around the RFP. And so, my goal is to try and convey that message, that there is a desire by the Council of the Commons to have an inclusive relationship with PAC around the use of the spaces as a joint property for in particular for the planning phase, that would come from the RFP. And certainly can weave in elements around the shorter term as well. But it's predominantly focused to try and build that relationship so that we can improve communication. Not to say it's been bad. It's just, we're two separate commissions. So.
And could I rotate this back to what we're supposed to be talking about is developing recommendations? Are you proposing that the presentation to PAC replaces our advisory activity as making recommendations to council?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Does the presentation, is that an example of replacing our ordinance, our ordained, if you will, mission to make recommendations, advisory recommendations to council? Are you substituting a presentation to PAC for some of that?
No, not at all. I think we had talked about providing an update to PAC. I think that had been a suggestion made at a previous Council of the Commons meeting, and so this was our way of fulfilling that request. And we sort of weaved in the idea that it would be a very good idea as part of the RFP to try and work together more. And so that was sort of the direction that we took it, but not a substitution.
Yeah. Okay. So this whole discussion that has moved toward the presentation of PAC started out with designating the center of the city site as a potential park, and I think that's loosely a direction that we could go in. As I said, in special properties area. But we do need to make recommendations to council. We don't just make presentations to ancillary groups. And so if we don't address council as we are addressing PAC, we are diminishing our chances of moving some of the near-term activation move forward.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think you or somebody had brought up a question around parks, and so I was trying to address that, even though it's on the agenda later.
Will we be doing one to the library? doing
I
a
know, but
presentation.
I met with the library director. I don't think there's a reason to do a presentation to the library director right now. And I'm happy to share all of the updates around Block Partners conversations, as can Sarah as well, when we get to that working group.
So do we have, for instance, I think one of the recommendations that's been talked about in various informal conversations is to include someone like Eli Newberg from the library on our commission here, because we don't have an actual limitation on how many members we can have. But even if we do consider we have a limitation, we could reassign some of the redundant seats. So this is part of what I would call developing recommendations. We may not get to what we propose, but we need to bring up a recommendation so that we can move forward with the information that we get in response.
So I guess taking it back to the recommendations then, because I feel like we're having a conversation here. I know Frank's got some input. I would like to bring it back to the suggestion I made, though. I feel like there are two types of time periods we're talking about here. One is in terms of making a recommendation to City Council on. One is definitively associated with the planning for the longer term that would be part of an RFP, a proposal that we accepted as part of the RFP. And then there is one that is before that time period. And I guess what I'm trying to indicate is I feel like there is a lot of interest in making sure that we do both, and I think that makes sense. I feel like that's the longer term is we just need, it's going to be our job to influence the planning process after we finish fundraising for the RFP and the city selects a firm after receiving responses from that. But then in addition to that, there is this whole time period beforehand. And it sounded like to me that there were a number of things that were brought up and then a whole series of questions that were associated with those things. What I'm trying to suggest is that maybe there is a way that we can do some of that work in concert and then bring parks in, hopefully after this conversation with them in July, later this month. But I'd like to suggest, it sounds like there is a strong interest in doing some crafting of recommendations around shorter term activities, shorter term meaning pre-planning. And I'd like to see where folks are at on that. And I'll let that stew for a second. Colin, Frank, go ahead.
Adam, I like the approach of the shorter term issues and then the longer term planning. What I'm observing, and the PAC and Parks Department is an example. I wasn't clear in the early months of our deliberation what the level of interest was on the part of the parks people, PAC and staff. I now feel that they are interested. They want to be a part of this. I'm encouraged by that. And I think we're all observing from various vantage points, new people coming into this whole process. I'll just mention Caitlin Phillips, for example, who I think that it's become a familiar name with most of us, the granddaughter of Frederick Law Olmsted, and she's been in Ann Arbor forever, and within the last few months, she's shown an interest. So I'm encouraged by people wanting to sort of find their footing and how they can participate in it. The more that organizations within city government want to engage and want to be part of this process, I take as encouraging. So I guess that's my comment.
So I'd like to make a suggestion then, because I think there is, we have these working groups and there are doing certain things right now. Is there a maybe pertaining to this shorter term activation? Maybe there is a additional charge that we provide there, and really focus in on what our recommendations to council will be around pre-planning, the pre-planning stage. Is there an interest in doing that? And if so, who wants to be part of that?
I guess I have a comment on that. I mean, the short-term activation, we had a short-term activation committee, still do. There, you know, some of the conversations that I thought kind of came out of that to some degree were, you know, certainly a need to focus in on existing parcels. You know, I think, I guess I would say putting that within that the committee structure that is already existing would make sense as opposed to starting something new.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Alan? Alan, you're muted. I'm sorry.
You're muted, Alan.
Oh, sorry again. Yes, I'm most interested in the shorter term activation. That is basically the function that for which the initiating committee for the Commons was organized, to bring forward the recommendations out of the center of the city task force and see how those can best be carried forward. So I want to participate in that in the shorter term. I've made a number of suggestions of how I think between active programming and passive, allowing the space to be used, and various ways of supervision and maintenance can be done. So I have a lot of ideas in that area. And if we are thinking about putting forward a series of proposals or recommendations to the city to basically carry forward and do what the city council has already said should be done, but with more specificity to it, I'd be very pleased to be part of that. I thought I was part of this activation committee, but I never saw that it actually functioned.
Yeah, Alan, I'll take the action item. I just wrote a note to myself around not only the questions that were asked and also the items that Rita identified, you know, to check in and see where we're at on the shorter term activation work group, and then also to include you in it. And I know Rita has a lot of questions around this, and so I'm going to make sure she's also part of that as well. So I will take this action item and follow up with Jen and see where we're at. And then we can start moving this forward based on today's discussion, if that's okay with folks. Sounds
Okay.
good. Alice, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think I would be pleased if each work group would put forward from their findings and work. Each work group might put forward a recommendation or two as something that they feel would be useful for the pre-planning, and perhaps with a goal type recommendation for planning. Do this first so we can do this next kind of thing. Or just the first one would be fine for now. I'm just anxious to actually be an advisory commission to put forth some needed recommendations to see if we can get the help of council to at least authorize that either a volunteer group or a funded group or some modest city funds, which, I mean, those of us who've thought about it don't think it's a big expenditure, easily covered by donations or volunteer work. We're pretty sure, but if we don't make a recommendation and get the authorization to go ahead, we can't do anything.
Let's Alice, I made a note to talk with you about how we could do exactly what we just said in terms of having each working group. So let's have that conversation offline here.
That's fine with me.
That sounds good. I think I know where you're going with it. So I think let's include that in our discussion. Okay. So I'll check in with Jen after this discussion and see how things are going in terms of the existing working group, figure out how we can reconfigure this agenda, turn it into more of a developing recommendations around the pre-planning phase for now. Certainly we can table things that are part of the planning. And then Alice brought up a good point around each of the working groups being able to make some recommendations to be included in that planning process, initial planning. So we can make sure all those things happen. And so we'll go ahead and, does that feel good in terms of a next step for developing recommendations to City Council?
Can we put a date on that, like next meeting? Have those recommendations ready for next meeting?
When you say recommendations, which one? You mean the shorter term?
The proposed recommendations for the near term activation, which would include, for instance, an active DDA representative, a cars off the surface of the roof of the parking lot. Some of the ones that have been mentioned over and over again that the public does desire. I think we need to be responsible to our public that voted us into this job, and also to our ordinance that says we should make annual recommendations, and so far we haven't made any.
I think let's say we'll try to get them done by the next meeting. At least we can show progress. Is that okay?
It would only be 5 recommendations, isn't that how many work groups we have?
Well, I think that some of these recommendations, frankly, are going to lead ourselves down a series of additional questions. So I'm not so sure that we'll end up with 5, frankly.
Well, 3 would be fine. 2, just some. And if you have to evaluate them as being, quote, safe for early introduction, that's fine. But I think that cars off the top of the roof it's very important. It's very symbolic and very engaging of the DDA and other people who desire to have a place to be casual use.
I think that's fair. I do think that Erica had brought up a concern that she had that I think is justified. And so I think it's a matter of navigating those things. So, but I hear you. And I think there's probably a way we can weave this, make it work. So, but I think that's a very valid point. Rita, you got the last word on this one, and then we'll move on the agenda.
Right. As a proponent of casual use, I'd really like to see that move forward, because we are continuing in this chicken and egg kind of thing, that we can't activate it because we can't get the cars off the top. We can't get the cars off the top because we can't activate it. So let's break the cycle, please.
Hear you on that. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on then to the working group updates. Frank or Rita, or Frank, would you like to give an update around Alice? Well, Alice, did you select?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Rita or Frank, sorry. Would you like to give an update on the comparable communities? I know you've got an attachment to the agenda here too.
Well, I'll jump in, but Frank, please continue. We sent out. And I'm sorry that it didn't go to the whole group. It did go to the members of the comparable community work group. A summary comparing across the 3 communities that we've reached out to date. And I'll just say, as to me, the key element of what we found was that each of the cities, Detroit, Plymouth, and Royal Oak, were had an actively engaged, supportive DDA for their existing parks. The newest one being Royal Oak, and there is a sense of pride and commitment, and a sense of benefit to the community for these central parks that are used a lot. So I think that rather than march through each of the elements of the document that we gave you all, I ask that you look at it. And I think that in particular, well, all of them are really good, I think. Royal Oak has a very interesting link in its document, and it's part of the document that goes through its engagement process. That might be something that would be useful for us to look at in terms of the RFP. So I'll stop there, Frank. If you want to add anything, please do.
You're muted, Frank.
You're muted.
I don't have much to add. Obviously, we sought out communities that were successful, and it just demonstrates that this can be done. Ann Arbor clearly has the potential of success in this area, and it's heartening to see how successful over extended periods of time. Again, Royal Oak is just a brand new park as of December. But it was a very involved process that brought them to that opening of that park in December. I mean, they literally moved mountains in the form of buildings that were in the way. But I just think there's great role models right in our own backyard, and it continues to be puzzling to me that we can't make more progress more rapidly. And that, but as I said earlier, I do sense that people who were earlier opposed to this have come around and have been actively supporting now. Matt Altruda is case in point, the gentleman who organized the Sonic Lunch and works for Bank of Ann Arbor. He went from voting against Prop A to now enthusiastically participating. So I'm encouraged, and these comparable community studies just gives me more encouragement of ultimate success.
And I'll just add one point in there too. During the last meeting we had, I mentioned I was at the Mackinac Policy Conference, and I ended up running into one of the Oakland County Commission members, from around the Royal Oak community, and he mentioned about all the strife that was associated when they initially proposed that park. And it was certainly not something that was a process that had initial homogenous support from the community. And so they went through their own process as well. And as Frank mentioned, and certainly as we learned from speaking with people in Royal Oak, it has been really widely accepted in the community, and been a real positive gem now, I think, that it's complete. So sort of reminded me as to some of the history around this space, and hopefully a positive step forward. Next item, or next working group is the block partners. Sarah, did you want to provide some update? I know you've been working on things.
Yeah, so I actually have a survey ready to go. So Heather, I think you said you can send that out. if I send you all the stuff to send. We've been talking about how long to leave it open, but since it's summer, I figure we should just leave it open for a couple of months. Alan, you had asked who gets the responses, and I didn't respond to your email. So I set it up on Google. What is it? It's a Google form. So the responses will come to me, but I think I can share. I'm going to look into, I think I can share it with other people. So you'll be able to see, I think you can see when responses come in if I share it. So I'm going to work on that. So we have a good list of block partners to send it to. So hopefully we'll get some good responses. So Heather, I'll send it to you tomorrow or Monday. Maybe we send it out early next week, since this is probably a bad week to do it.
And Sarah, just so you know too, on this space, if there are some names in particular around certain institutions or anything like that, I've as I mentioned previously, I spoke with the new director.
I think we're going to leave some of those like heavy hitters off that you guys, some of you have been having, more personal conversations with. So yeah, I think like anything that you have to share from any of those that have happened over the past month.
For sure. Yeah. So certainly, I think that sounds good. I just was make sure that if you are contacting them, that we get their names included, the right people. So there's good communication. So I think we've had good conversation with the new library director, Eli. I think that was excellent conversation prior to Earth Day, and then we had some additional conversation around Earth Day. And certainly we've had ongoing conversation with Mike Martin from First Martin Corporation. Jeff Watson and I traded emails today. We're working on getting something set up there. And I did meet with a gentleman, the CFO of the University of Michigan Federal Credit Union, who had been connected with me through the Michigan Credit Union League, which is an association in Lansing that I worked with when I was a member of the legislature. We had coffee a couple of weeks ago, talked about the space, and just sort of, talked about how, their corporate branch is actually not the one on William. But he mentioned that he is the point of contact for sort of community engagement around this type of thing. And, I provided to him, I told him I would send him the RFI information that we'd received back from some of our potential interested planning partners. And I think it was very open-ended. It really wasn't a goal out of it except to let him know what was going on and ask that at some point as a block partner, University of Michigan University of Michigan Credit Union, participate in some advisory work, as we move forward in planning. And I think there was a very good conversation. He was very open to that. And I feel like there is certainly a pretty consistent interest from at least the folks that I have talked with about trying to make this move forward in a productive fashion. And certainly a lot of the comparable communities work has allowed those conversations to have a vision that I think people didn't really see before. And I think that's been really, really positive. So that would be the only other update. And I'm certain Sarah, if you'd like to include any of those folks, let me know and I'll provide emails or however. The next working group is fundraising. On the fundraising,
do you have any questions about these?
Yeah, sorry, Ellen, I didn't see your hand up. My apologies.
My hand up was up first.
Yeah, Alice has her hand up first.
It's the yellow background on Alice's screen is. Anyways, my apologies. Alice, go ahead first, and then Alan.
Well, I want to be brief, but you mentioned a lot of what might be called heavy hitters by some people, but there are smaller, say, property owners on the block, and also tenants on a block. And I would say we need to include the people who are across the streets that bind this, that are the boundaries of this block. And maybe, I don't know, maybe even somebody at the federal building, somebody at transit, somebody, the other side of Liberty, the other side of Division, the package store, I don't know. It seems like that there are a number of people who feel that you don't benefit from, you benefit from expanding the people who participate rather than limiting these people who participate in a survey like that.
So a lot of
just
those
wanna
people
mention
are on our survey list. We sort of started that way. We have a database that I think Erica started for us. So we have a lot of those people. And I think if there's anyone we leave off, I think we can probably circulate the database, maybe. I don't know. But I think the survey can be a living doc. Like, we can.
Yeah, you don't need my
forever.
stamp of approval. I just want to make sure that we were
We had the same
moving outward to bring people inward.
Yeah, we definitely looked beyond like the actual block itself and sort of the adjacencies and who else might have a vested interest in.
Such as the restaurant owners on Main Street, for instance.
I don't think they're on there.
Why not?
So
there's some of the objectors that
I think the Main Street Area Association is on there, but not individual restaurants. So.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good.
Excellent. Alan, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, well, I was particularly interested in the quality, the sense of conversation with Eli from the library, because Josie previously had been very cool on this whole endeavor. And I was hoping that Eli was more friendly and saw the potential of a partnership between the library and the Commons. So I was wondering about that conversation. And then also the conversation with the Martin people. In my conversations with them, they were interested in the Commons assuming the Noble House and the potential of moving the carriage house, that their space might be able to expand all the way to Library Lane. And whether your conversations touched any of those questions, as well as the notion of some kind of bridge or commercial arcade through a potential new building. Did they express any, were they ready to talk at all with you about their views toward what their new building might look like in terms of its scale and how it would be could be a bridge between the two ends of our barbell, so to speak, of Liberty Plaza and the Library Lane?
So I'll just speak to both of them as like what both. This has been the case of all of the individuals I've spoken with. There is a strong desire by all three entities that I've spoken with who have major stakes in that block to be intimately involved in the planning process that goes along after we successfully complete an RFP and the city selects a vendor for that plan. And I think that is a really important characteristic. I don't think that there is anything in concrete in terms of plans around anything from what I understand, but I think there is a lot of interest in creating something that works for the public first and foremost, and also works for the surrounding property owners, and that there is mutual benefit from that. And so what that looks like, I think, is very wide open at this point. But I think certainly you mentioned the library and First Martin Corporation. I think that there is interest from the two principals of those entities to be strongly engaged in that formal planning process to ensure that there is mutual benefit. So, Alan, wish I could be a little more specific, but I don't think that is the case at this
Too
point.
early. It's just too early.
Did the credit union express any thought of altering their structure, any infill construction, any change of what they were doing on their William Street, which has been most reduced in its service? It's a
No, they haven't. They didn't express any of that. We really didn't get into that, but I expressed that during that conversation. I expressed that the footprint that we were looking at was all the publicly owned spaces, the block, and that if there was a way that I know I certainly have cut through the credit union parking lot and walked into the Commons area and into Liberty Plaza, and certain others have as well. And if there's a way to work together with both the publicly owned spaces and the privately owned spaces for access and use, that would be something we would be interested in. I think that the credit union was very much interested in that as well. I felt it was a very warm reception, but we did not get into any sort of their planned uses of their current William Street branch or anything like that. That was really not the purpose of the meeting. And I think that would, if they were thinking of things, that would come up during that planning process. And that's why I do really, on a personal level, I think it's very important that there be a very strong advisory committee that's that's made up of not just the block partners, but other entities as well that goes along with that planning process. And certainly this committee could have a role in that, but also it provides a vehicle to bring in some other folks who have a vested interest in making the entire block successful. And I think that's going to be really important. So I'll just put a pin in that. I don't want to go down that route too early, but I think this planning process is going to have to be really important, and it's going to have to be real inclusive. So, but I feel like the conversations we've had thus far have been warmly received.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Good questions. In that case, we can wrap up the block partners, go into fundraising a little bit. We've had a good couple of discussions between Erica, Heather, Frank, and myself, most recently around some fundraising efforts. They've been mostly focused on where we could look for public or nonprofit funding opportunities, what foundations might be interested in that type of work. I think that we've at this point in time we've started to look into those different where we've left off is we started to look into those different opportunities, and we're going to meet again offline to do some additional work around who could be a good financial partner with this. And so, the goal would be to continue to move that effort forward. So I can provide an update again at the next meeting after we meet, in between. But I would say we are looking at all sources. We have a list going of public and private potential contributors. And we're starting to break that list up. We talked about the near-term activation already. If that's okay with folks, we could skip that part, that working group, especially since Jen's not here. And then the RFP. And so I'll provide an update on the RFP process. As I mentioned earlier, there is a strong desire to work with parks. And we had originally at this council requested that Heather and park staff work together. And we discussed that in our RFP working group. And so one of the best recommendations I think that came of that was to really try and engage directly with Parks Advisory Committee and to form a positive working relationship with them in order to move that effort forward. And so that's what we've done. So that's what the part of the goal. That's why our presentation with Parks, with PAC rather, is focused on that effort to create this strong working relationship so that we can then advance the RFP. So that process has been, a little bit slower than I think most of us would like, but I think we're doing the right thing with trying to set up this constructive working relationship with PAC in order to move the RFP forward as a joint relationship. I think one of the things that I've taken away from all of this has been that the way this charter is written with overlapping jurisdictions has caused a lot of confusion or haziness around who is doing what, and so that is what it is, and I think that's why it's very important. It's become very important to me that that we have a strong working relationship with both the Council of Commons and PAC because there is this cross-jurisdictional overlap, and that's going to be important to move things forward in a way that is constructive. And so that is what I've got in terms of an update around the RFP. Alan, you got your hand up.
Yeah, well, as you describe the cross-jurisdictional situation, I want you please to add the trans-jurisdictional situation, that there needs to be a mechanism like a conservancy or a land trust or something that bridges the various jurisdictions and includes a public participation independent of the parks or any of the governmental organizations. So that this is a new form of organization, and so that different groups are now have sovereignty, as it were, in parts of it, needs to be embraced in some form that includes all of them and includes the users and the public in its organization.
Sure. Erica?
Yeah, I wanted to agree with you, Alan. I think that you're right about the need for conservancy. I think that's been shown pretty clearly in some of the best practices around research of these public spaces and how they work. I just would like to not set up the expectation that a conservancy will be organized likely out of this group or out of city functioning. Those are sort of private endeavor, really nonprofit endeavors, but that is something that is going to be from and by the community, I think, to make that model work. So I just certainly I think you're right that there's going to need that public-private partnership, but how that actually gets formed is something that.
Well, it seems like it's one of the elements in the request for proposals, that the proposal, envision how that form of management actually is brought into being.
I think it's going to be an important, certainly to speak to what Erica said. I think the entity, I personally, from these working groups around comparable communities, this has been a very consistent key element, that allows for some different forms of management. I think it's going to be important for us to spec that out to what Erica was speaking to, but we may not be ultimately the ones deciding around who it is or what it looks like. And so I think it's going to be important that we influence, but the entity itself may be something that is set up as some type of joint relationship. I really don't know at this point. I think there's a lot of ways to do this. So Frank, you got your hand up, and I know you know a little something about this too. So
very little. I'd like to say that my crystal ball just became very clear on this issue, but I can't say that. I was just going to add, clearly working, our group working with parks, the DDA has to be front and center as a very active partner. And I think the block partners, and then I've heard you describe an advisory group of probably a larger footprint of organizations is going to be key as those groups get engaged. They're going to have, I think, a very positive influence on all these questions about longer term management and so on. I know there's been an effort down on the Huron River by, I guess, I don't know if it's DTE who's developing or some developers developing the DTE property along the river. There's been attempts to create a conservancy with the help of the community foundation. I don't know much about it, but there's even efforts in our own community to develop some kind of public space with a conservancy overseeing it down there. So we may want to look under the hood of that process.
Absolutely. I think that is on the list, in fact.
Okay.
Is there a chance we could get a report on what's going on there? I've heard of similar, rumblings.
Yeah, I think we can do that. In fact, I've got it's on my list to have a conversation with those folks. So I could certainly provide a report at our next meeting.
Great.
All right. I'm just going to make a note here to check on this. Other questions at all around the RFP? Okay. In that case, we've already covered the next agenda item on our agenda was the update on the report to parks or to PAC. We've talked about that extensively this evening already. Are there any other questions around that item or points that people feel are still outstanding? Okay. In that case, we can talk about next agenda items. We do have a few that we've added tonight. Wanted to see if there are other ones. The ones I noted, I'm going to provide that update around what's going on down by the river that Alan just suggested. We're also going to try and do whatever we can to create some short-term recommendations to City Council, at least show progress. I have some items to check with Jen on to make that happen within the confines of our working group structure. And also to add in Alan and Rita to those discussions. Are there other items outside of what we've talked about sort of in the last short bit here that we want to add into our agenda? We know that we want to have on our August agenda. Obviously, we'll have a response back from PAC. We can bring that up again as well, post our discussion with them on the 18th. Got a couple hands up. Alan, I think, was first, then Heather, and then Frank.
Well, I had shared perhaps inappropriately 11 points that I thought were proper in the request for proposals. And I want to know, how do we have some discussion here, not only of those particular points, but of others, is our input into the request for proposals. Can that conversation be in our next agenda? Similarly, I outlined a summary of the elements described both for the Civic Center building and for the Central Park as they evolved since the first discussion of this in now almost 10 years ago, when the first Imagine a Park program was held 2 days after the dedication of the underground parking structure, that on the 14th of July in 2012. So I would like to see that material somehow on our table for reflection, addition, improvement, conversation.
Okay. Do that. Heather?
Yeah, so in August, our meeting conflicts with a city council meeting. The city council meeting was moved to the night that we typically have meetings. So we need to either cancel our meeting or move our meeting. So one suggestion is to move it to the 11th, the following Thursday. So just wanted to put that out to the group. That maybe doesn't have to be decided right now, but if you want to look at your schedules, we could go ahead and move the meeting.
Heather, could we take a poll, a poll doodle offline to see about potentially the 11th, or what is the date that we're scheduled for right now?
It is
the 4th. Yeah. I have a conflict on the 11th. I can tell you that. I have a meeting.
Okay.
But why don't we do because it's not just me. So why don't we do a poll? It shouldn't be just about me, obviously. So let's do a poll offline and see. Maybe we can check the 11th. We can check the 18th. We could check some other days as well. So how about maybe you and I can put together some dates, and then we'll send that out. Is that okay?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. Thanks for raising that. I know you put that in an email as well, so I forgot. Frank, you've got your hand up. You're muted, Frank.
Start by saying that the 18th is the 48th anniversary of my 30th birthday. So I'll probably, hopefully I'll still be here. The other thing I should have probably, and this, I'll make this brief, but because I think I've talked about it before, I really want us to take a look at a kind of a two-phased RFP. The first phase is, really looking at the data that already exists from the task force, engaging in some depth with the DDA about the structural issues and basically how we can work better together. And there are just, I think, some things that could be accomplished, engaging the block partners and the wider advisory committee. I think we're close to having enough money if we define a phase one around gathering and analyzing data as opposed to getting into development and design of the site. And that we could, I think by engaging the community in meaningful ways in phase one will facilitate our ability to raise additional money to complete phase two of an RFP. So I'll just stop there because I think I've talked about this earlier. I just want to bring that back as a concept to think about.
I think those are good suggestions. Other agenda items that we would like to have on for August. All right, we do have a pretty good standing agenda. Obviously this meeting was formed out of a standing agenda, and so we'll utilize that as a baseline.
Adam, will you be considering asking each? We've often intended to do this, to have some kind of product from within each report from the working groups, individual working groups. Could we maybe ask for consideration by each group of what they would ask for or advise to accomplish some goal that we could consider at next meeting and pass on to City Council? I mean, it couldn't be any more than 5 if we ask for 1.
We are. In fact, that's going to be the basis of a conversation I have with you as to how you can help advance that. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Putting our great minds together there. Alice, the A team.
And I'd just like to chime in. I just remember that every commission has as their mission being an advisory body to council. So it's, I know that there's a feeling that we want to make progress on this, but some of that progress may be appearing in ways that don't necessarily have to send something to council for additional work. For example, I see the work on the developing funding and actually getting to the RFP process. That is the most tangible progress we could possibly make on this, is getting to a long-term design and cost for this. That would be a major accomplishment. So I just.
If you take Frank's suggestion, design is not the first thing. The data is.
It certainly could be broken up in multiple different ways. Just wanted to not make people feel like you have to come up with a list of.
But I think it's good to have a goal. I think instead of just having a report, I think it needs to have a little bit of oomph to it. Like we could do some of this if maybe we did this little thing. Just something for near term to give us all encouragement.
I think that there's certainly ways, as I have found with a lot of things, momentum begets more momentum. And so, taking action, moving some things forward, certainly I agree with Erica's sentiments that the real major step will be the points around being able to go out for that RFP and start that process. I think that will be a very significant step forward for the community. And so, but I hear also the strong will to make some tangible action steps before then. And we've talked about that several times here. And so, we're going to try and create some ideas in between now and our next meeting. And so.
Will we have any progress on the RFP, like a draft at all? Do we have an idea of when that will be?
No,
available?
the RFP won't be written until we have the funding in place. So that's been stated before, and that will continue to be the case.
I'm particularly aware of that condition.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. I think that there are two things related to the RFP, that are really important considerations. One, we do have a strong interest in working with Parks Department to have a joint writing of that RFP, and two, funding really does matter. And I think that there certainly are things that maybe we could advance, in terms of Frank's suggestion, but we need to make a little more progress on the money before we go forward. I think we've got a good start, and that's been helpful. And we're making some effort to try and increase that funding. And I feel like, we will get, but we do have an idea of what the RFP is going to cost. That's what that RFI process informed for us. And, if we can make a little more progress towards that, then I think we would be able to justify getting things going. But Heather is right. We do need more funding before we can start that formal process.
You mean the RFP won't be written before we have the money in hand? I heard they won't be circulated, but if it won't even be written, we don't have any opportunity actually to have input into it.
No, Alan, that's not what was said. It's not going to be sent out before the funding is in place, because we're not going to ask vendors to respond to something that we don't have funding for. We're working on.
I think also staff is not going to be spending time writing it until we have more funding in place as well.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify, I guess, piggybacking on Alan, it seems we have a chicken and an egg here. From my vantage point, I can't quite imagine why we couldn't have the RFP written and ready to go. It has to happen sometime, but I guess I don't understand what's on the inner workings of City Hall on that issue.
We don't even have grant applications in. There's not. This is at this point. there needs to be serious efforts to provide additional funding to this endeavor.
That's the major reason why I want to split this into 2 phases, because we're a lot closer to, in my judgment, of the funds we would need for a phase 1. That needs to be looked at in some detail, but and I think doing it that way gives us a better chance of raising money for phase 2 when people see the tangible progress and they're involved in that phase 1 process. But I don't want to sound like a broken record here.
Yeah. I don't want to sound like a broken record either, except that there are previous resolutions passed by previous city councils already demonstrating that there were ideas of where some public funding was available. And this, times have changed, but I mean, the kind of thinking that was going on earlier was more encouraging and still including private sources of funding and grants such as we're talking about now. I mean, where there's the will, we have more chance. When there's no will, we can't even get started. But, I mean, I don't mean to say there's no will. I just, it is sounding more like chicken and egg question, as Frank said.
Well, I think
I have that feeling before.
I think that to the point that Erica made, I think that making some progress around fundraising will help our ability to advance before we have all the cash in hand. But we have not, made tangible progress in terms of dollars in the door around fundraising yet. And so, we need to work on both of those things. And so I hear you around the chicken and the egg scenario. But I think what the point that's being expressed is we don't want to spend valuable time that the city is paying for around writing something if we're not making progress on being able to pay for it. And so I think that's a justifiable consideration.
Another background question, maybe naive, is what paid for the task force and its report? What money paid for that?
I have no idea.
That was city. I mean, that was city resources paying for staff, and then I think there was a large volunteer endeavor to actually produce that report. Is that correct, Heather?
Yeah, it was city funds that paid for that effort. I did the work to put that document together, wrote the draft of it, and then it was edited by the task force.
So there's an inclination at this time not to use staff time, but to use volunteer and private funding. Is that it?
Well, I think we're going to hire a professional planning firm to do the RFP. That would be the process that we would want for professional RFP. City staff would write the RFP, but we would hire a firm, an engineering, probably a multidiscipline firm to do the actual work. Behind the scenes, a selective firm. Right. City staff, it would be, this would have to involve the Parks Department because of Liberty Plaza being involved. So there's a question that's in the air about who on city staff would be writing the RFP and which group within city staff would be managing the process. Would it be Parks or some other group? Yeah.
So that's assuming we get to pay the salaries of the internal people by fundraising.
Paying for that. Not paying the salaries of staff, but paying for the professional team that would be doing the process.
The selected team from the RFP.
Right, the design process.
Okay, so it's very unclear what you're talking about. We have to fundraise in order to have staff assigned to write the RFP?
No, all that's going on here is that there is an interest in, we all have an interest in moving this forward, but there's also an interest in ensuring that we are fundraising to help move it forward. And so I didn't want to dwell on this too much because I don't think these things are actually mutually exclusive by any means. I think we need to show progress on fundraising. And in concert with that, we also need to build these relationships with parks to ensure that the process moves forward in a way that is constructive and that it is supported by the fact that we're raising money, that we're actually going to hit this goal so that so that not only are we not waiting once we have raised the money, but also that the RFP is not sitting there for 6 months on a shelf waiting for us to finish raising the money. And so I feel like this is just something that would be done anyways. But I think the goal is because we have not been raising money for a long time, that we show some progress to move forward with that before the RFP actually gets written. And you know what? We also need to work with parks to ensure that that was the strong desire was to ensure that there was a mutual relationship in writing that, and we need to make that happen as well. And that does take some time too, but that starts with the PAC discussion.
Park's got $100,000, so that would be good for Liberty Plaza. That could be counted.
That's dedicated for the issues that are happening at Liberty Plaza.
Right, and that's part of our block. So some percentage of that should be, at least tenuously connected to the money that's available.
When Administrator Dehoney asked for that funding from council, he was clear about what that funding was going for, and there's been a stakeholder group that has been working on that. So I don't think this, it's not to say that this is not an important project. Council did put forward funding for this, and so council has allocated funding for the design process as well as for the work on Liberty Plaza. So, but this has been throughout the process community, is the sense this is going to be a public-private partnership.
Yeah, and this is part of our difficulty that I think Adam is trying to address with a presentation to PAC, to try to knit together some of the overlapping jurisdictions and authorities and so forth, and the management structure and everything. I mean, Parks does manage Liberty Plaza, and we are trying to develop a management for the entire block that would be inclusive of Liberty Plaza and the other block partners.
That's right. Rita, you've got your hand up. You are muted, I think. You are not appearing to be muted, but we cannot hear you.
All right, my earphones ran out of battery. So I feel like this is information that is somewhat new to me, at least at this level of depth of discussion. And I am feeling disappointed to feel that way right now. So I hope that we have some criteria that are clear in terms of the fundraising, in terms of like specific amounts of money, so that we know when we're moving forward. And I do feel like we do need to knit this project together. And I'm going to keep my optimism light bulb going, because I think that you've got that started with the presentation to Parks. But I hope that there's more communication that comes through between that presentation to Parks, the ultimate outcome that will flow to the RFP, and the ultimate outcome that's going to be the work of improving the Liberty Plaza, which, as Alice said, is part of our purview, I thought. If it's not, then I'm really confused. And I do think that my suggestion about looking at this as being a part of Parks overall will help us in the end. So I'm going to remain asked to have that remain on the table. Thank you.
Hear you on that, Rita. Thank you. Okay. Any other points that we'd like to add in around next agenda before we move into public comment?
Well, I'm
Frank has his hand up.
I'm disturbed that there is going to be no public view of the development of this request for proposals until funds are raised for a request for proposals that is basically private and has no public input. It seems that the request for proposals, the ideas in it, the emphasis of it, the kind of group we are looking for should be part of our process beginning now, with a draft of the staff, with Heather and the parks, if they want to participate, begin to formulate that we and the public can see and discuss, as well as we are out seeking to raise funds to see how to find qualified professional assistance in carrying forward the intent of the proposals. That there is nothing that we see until the funds are done just seems very hard for me to comprehend.
Yeah, I hear you on this, Alan. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that I think that it's about progress. And I think that is the name of the game here. And certainly I am not interested in not doing anything until we have all the funding raised. And you can bet I will push against any notion on that. But
well, I hope we can see a draft, the beginnings of the frame of a draft, or the structure of the how the city approaches a draft soon.
Yeah, I think we're gonna work on some fundraising as well, and we are going to work on developing a stronger relationship with parks so that we can do this mutually. Frank, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. I'm sensing growing frustration among those who have been major contributors to Library Green, and therefore to Library Green's commitment to fund the RFP. And what keeps coming up to me in comment, and these are important voices going forward, that the city has, and many cities in this country have had this windfall of funding from the federal government, and it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Correct me, Erica, if I'm wrong, in total. And other studies like the tree line, et cetera, have had funding, generous funding from the city, and it just seems that this has to be a public-private partnership, and there's a significant level of frustration that the city is not doing more. Adam and I are going to meet with these people. We're going to try to assure them that progress is being made, but there is frustration beyond what's being expressed here in this meeting.
Erica, and then we'll try and wrap this issue up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say there were $24 million that we received in ARPA funds. You can imagine the competing priorities within the city for using those funds. There were staff generated over $40 million of potential projects, and we were not even close to being able to come towards that. It went out for significant public input, and that did end up shifting how we ended up allocating some of those fund dollars. I think that I've heard from many different communities in the city about why didn't we use ARPA funds for X? Why didn't we use ARPA funds for Y? As much as it's wonderful to have had that funding, we couldn't use it for every project. But again, this is, I know that we want to see progress, but this is going to need to be a public-private partnership. And there's going to need to be additional fundraising efforts. We put out the RFI to get a better sense of what this would cost. I think we had hoped it was going to be a little less than it was. And, we found that it's going to be around $120,000. And that means, more more fundraising needs to happen. I would say that it is unusual to have fundraising even being discussed within a city commission. The fact that we would have a community group of volunteers kind of coming together. Typically in other projects, this has happened outside of the city structure, this type of fundraising effort. So I guess I would leave us there.
Well, I've heard that there's a much larger amount of money that came from the federal government. I don't study these things in detail, but
I can send a link out to our website, and there's an accounting of it.
There was some reference a few months ago about the tree line in line for significant funding, but I don't know where that went. Okay.
No, that's not accurate. The tree line has not received any money from Arbor or from the city recently.
So in that case, we're going to close that agenda item and move on to public comment. Heather, do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
Okay, excellent. In that case, the only agenda item left is adjournment. We do have a number of action items. We'll circle back on those action items. And so in that case, can we have a motion to adjourn? Made by Erica. Second. I'll second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Bye-bye.